Human beings are diurnal creatures. We are biologically programmed to be awake when the sun is shining and to sleep when the world goes dark. For thousands of years, the night was a time of extreme danger. The darkness was where the predators hunted. In our modern world, we have invented artificial light to push back the shadows. We have built cities that never sleep. But there are still places where the modern world cannot reach. There are still jobs that require a person to step away from the safety of the herd and sit completely alone in the pitch black of night. Working the night shift is a psychological test. The silence plays tricks on your ears. The shadows play tricks on your eyes. And when you are miles away from the nearest human being, you quickly realize that if something goes wrong, no one is coming to save you. Welcome to the isolated shift. Over the next hour, we are going to explore the terrifying true stories of people who took a job in the dark, only to discover that they were not the only ones working the graveyard shift. This is Chapter 1, The Fire Tower. The Pacific Northwest is home to some of the most dense, ancient, and unforgiving wilderness in the United States. Millions of acres of towering pine trees stretch as far as the eye can see. To protect these massive forests from devastating wildfires, the Forestry Service employs fire lookouts. The job is incredibly simple, but mentally exhausting. You are dropped off at the base of a massive steel tower, usually standing 80 to 100 feet in the air. At the top of the tower is a small 10 by 10 foot glass cabin. For 3 months out of the summer, you live in that tiny glass box. Your only job is to stare out at the horizon with a pair of binoculars, looking for smoke. For Arthur, a 24-year-old college student looking for a quiet place to read and save money, it sounded like the perfect summer job. He was assigned to Tower 42, located deep within a national forest in Oregon. It was a 6-hour drive from the nearest small town, followed by a 2-hour hike up a steep dirt trail just to reach the base of the tower. When the ranger dropped him off, he handed Arthur a 2-way radio and said, "I will call you every morning at 8 a.m. for a check-in. Do not drain the battery. And whatever you do, do not go wandering into the tree line at night. The bears out here are massive." The ranger drove away, and Arthur climbed the 89 wooden steps up to his new home. For the first 2 weeks, it was paradise. The views were breathtaking. He read books, drank coffee, and watched the sun set over the endless ocean of green trees. But when the sun goes down in the deep woods, the darkness is absolute. There is no light pollution. There are no street lamps. Once night falls, the glass walls of the cabin turn into black mirrors, reflecting Arthur's own face back at him. It was on the 14th night that the isolation finally began to crack. Around 2 in the morning, Arthur was sitting in his small chair, trying to read by the light of a small battery-powered lantern. The wind was howling outside, rattling the glass panes of the cabin. Suddenly, the two-way radio sitting on the desk crackled to life. It was just a burst of loud white noise. Static. Arthur jumped in his chair. The radio was supposed to be completely silent until the morning check-in. He reached over and picked up the heavy plastic radio. He pressed the button on the side. He said, "Tower 42, here. Is anyone trying to reach me?" Over. He let go of the button and waited. Just a long, empty hiss of static. Arthur shook his head, assuming it was just atmospheric interference. He set the radio down and went back to his book. 10 minutes later, it happened again. But this time, it wasn't just static. Through the crackling white noise, Arthur heard a sound that made his stomach drop. It was the sound of someone whistling. It was a slow, uneven, breathless whistle, like someone trying to mimic a bird but getting the notes completely wrong. Arthur grabbed the radio again. His hands were sweating. He pressed the button. He said, "This is Tower 42. Who is on this channel? Identify yourself." He let go of the button. The whistling stopped, and then a voice came through the speaker. It was heavily distorted, but Arthur could clearly make out the words. The voice repeated Arthur's exact own words back to him, mimicking his exact tone of voice. The voice said, "This is Tower 42. Who is on this channel? Identify yourself." Arthur felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. Someone was on the same radio frequency. Someone was listening to him. He turned the volume down and pushed his chair away from the desk. He stood up and looked out the glass windows. It was pitch black outside. He couldn't see the ground 80 feet below him. He convinced himself that it was a trucker on a nearby highway whose radio had accidentally caught the forestry frequency. It had to be. There was no other logical explanation. Arthur eventually managed to fall asleep around 4 in the morning. When the morning check-in came, he asked the ranger if anyone else was on the channel last night. The ranger sounded confused. He told Arthur that the frequency was strictly encrypted. No one else could access it. The next 3 days were quiet. Arthur tried to forget the incident. But on the 18th night, the true nightmare began. It was a completely windless night. The forest was dead silent. Arthur was lying in his small cot, staring up at the ceiling. At exactly 3:15 a.m., the motion sensor floodlight mounted at the base of the tower suddenly clicked on. A massive beam of white light illuminated the dirt clearing 80 feet below. Arthur sat bolt upright in his bed. The light was incredibly sensitive. It only turned on if something large walked directly underneath the tower. He slowly got out of bed. He crept over to the edge of the glass cabin and looked down at the illuminated ground below. He expected to see a brown bear rummaging through the dirt. Or maybe a large deer. But what he saw standing directly at the base of his tower was not an animal. It was standing on two legs. It was incredibly tall, easily over 7 feet. It was unnaturally thin, its limbs long and distorted. It was entirely naked, its skin a pale, sickly gray color that reflected the harsh white floodlight. Arthur stopped breathing. He couldn't comprehend what he was looking at. He pressed his face against the cold glass, terrified. The creature was not moving. It was just standing in the dirt, its long arms hanging down past its knees. And then the creature slowly tilted its head back. It looked straight up, directly at the glass cabin, directly at Arthur. Even from 80 feet in the air, Arthur could see that its face was completely wrong. Its eyes were massive, dark voids, and its mouth was stretched into an impossibly wide, horrifying smile. Arthur backed away from the window, his entire body trembling violently. He tripped over his chair and crashed onto the wooden floor. He grabbed the two-way radio. He pressed the button. He didn't care about the rules. He screamed into the microphone. He screamed, "Ranger, emergency. There is something at the base of my tower. Send help right now." He let go of the button and listened. The radio hissed with static, and then the voice came through. The exact same distorted voice from a few nights ago, but it wasn't coming from the radio. The voice was coming from outside the cabin, from below. The creature at the bottom of the tower was mimicking Arthur's terrified scream, perfectly imitating the panic in his voice. And then Arthur heard a sound that will haunt him until the day he dies. He heard the heavy wooden creak of the first step of the staircase. The creature was climbing the tower. Thump, thump, thump. The heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the silent night air. It was climbing slowly, methodically. Arthur was trapped in a glass box in the sky. The only way in or out was a heavy wooden trap door in the center of the cabin floor. He scrambled across the room, grabbed his heavy steel footlocker, and dragged it over the trapdoor. He piled his chair, his desk, and every heavy object he could find on top of it. He backed into the furthest corner of the cabin, clutching a small pocket knife, sobbing quietly in the dark. The footsteps grew louder and louder. 40 steps, 60 steps, 80 steps. The footsteps stopped right beneath the wooden floorboards. Arthur could hear it breathing. He could hear it shifting its weight on the top landing, just inches below the trapdoor. He waited for it to start bashing against the wood. He waited for it to break the glass, but it did nothing. It just stood there in the dark, right under his feet, for 4 agonizing hours. Arthur didn't move a single muscle until the sun finally began to rise, casting a pale gray light over the forest. When the morning check-in radio call buzzed at 8 a.m. Arthur didn't answer. When the ranger drove out to check on him later that afternoon, he found Arthur curled in a fetal position in the corner of the cabin, completely catatonic. Arthur never went back to the woods. He quit his job that very day. But before the ranger took him down from the tower, Arthur pointed a shaking finger at the glass window near the trapdoor. On the outside of the glass, 80 feet in the air, were 3 massive, pale, greasy handprints. If you ever take a job that requires you to be alone in the dark, remember Arthur's story. Remember that when you look out into the pitch-black night, the darkness might just be looking back at you. When we return in Chapter 2, we will move from the deep woods to the harsh neon lights of a lonely gas station. A place where the monsters don't hide in the trees. They walk right through the front door. Welcome back. In our first chapter, we explored the terrifying isolation of the deep woods, a place where the darkness is absolute and the monsters hide in the trees. But isolation isn't always about being miles away from civilization. Sometimes the most terrifying isolation happens under the bright, buzzing fluorescent lights of a place you see every single day. This is Chapter 2, The Gas Station Encounter. Working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station is a uniquely lonely experience. From midnight to 6 in the morning, the world belongs to the drifters, the insomniacs, and the people who have nowhere else to go. You are trapped behind a small counter, surrounded by snacks and lottery tickets, protected only by a glass door and a small bell that chimes when someone walks in. For a 22-year-old David, it was just a way to pay for his college tuition. He worked at a small, independently owned gas station on a desolate stretch of Route 66 in the Nevada desert. The nearest town was 40 miles away in either direction. At night, the gas station was the only source of light for miles, glowing like a beacon in an ocean of black asphalt and sand. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The desert air was freezing. David had been on shift for 3 hours, and he hadn't seen a single car pass by. He was sitting on a stool behind the counter, reading a magazine, listening to the low hum of the drink refrigerators. At exactly 2:45 in the morning, the heavy glass door at the front of the store swung open. The electronic chime echoed loudly through the quiet store. Ding dong. David looked up, expecting to see a tired truck driver looking for a cup of black coffee. Instead, a man walked in. The man was tall, wearing a faded, oversized trench coat that dragged on the dirty linoleum floor. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, hiding his eyes in deep shadow. He didn't look at David. He didn't say a word. He just walked slowly, methodically, toward the back of the store, disappearing down the aisle with the motor oil and car supplies. David watched him on the small, grainy, black and white security monitor sitting next to the cash register. The camera feed showed the man standing perfectly still at the end of the aisle. He wasn't looking at the products. He was facing the blank wall. A knot of unease began to form in David's stomach. He had dealt with strange people before, but there was something entirely wrong with the way this man moved. He was completely silent. He didn't even make a sound when his heavy boots hit the floor. 5 minutes passed. The man didn't move an inch. David cleared his throat. He called out across the empty store. "Hey man, you need help finding anything? We close the registers in 15 minutes for a system reboot." The man didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. David's heart rate started to climb. He slowly reached under the counter and rested his hand on the heavy metal baseball bat his manager kept hidden near the safe. He stared at the security monitor, watching the motionless figure. 10 minutes passed. The silence in the store was deafening. The only sound was the humming of the refrigerators. David couldn't take it anymore. He decided he was going to tell the man to leave. He gripped the baseball bat tightly, stood up from his stool, and slowly walked out from behind the safety of the counter. He took quiet, careful steps down the center aisle. His palms were sweating. He reached the end of the aisle and turned the corner, raising the bat defensively. The aisle was completely empty. David froze. He looked up and down the row. Nothing. He quickly checked the bathroom door. It was locked from the outside with a padlock. The man was gone. David let out a massive sigh of relief, dropping the bat to his side. He assumed the man had quietly slipped out the front door while David was distracted by the monitor. The chime must have just malfunctioned. He walked back to the front counter, shaking his head at his own paranoia. He sat back down on his stool and slid the bat back into its hiding place. But as he looked up at the black and white security monitor, his blood turned to ice. The camera angle that pointed at the front door showed the parking lot outside. It was completely empty. No car had pulled up. No car had driven away. David reached out with a trembling hand and pressed the rewind button on the security system. He wanted to see exactly when the man had walked out the door. He watched the grainy footage skip backward. He saw himself walking down the aisle with the bat. He saw the empty store. And then he rewound the tape to the exact moment he had stepped out from behind the counter. What David saw on that screen is a nightmare he will never wake up from. On the video, as David walked down the center aisle toward the back of the store, the tall man in the trench coat silently stepped out from behind an end cap display right near the front. The man hadn't left the store. He had been hiding. The video showed the man waiting until David's back was completely turned. And then, with terrifying, silent speed, the man dropped to his hands and knees. He crawled across the floor, right toward the front counter. David sat paralyzed on his stool, watching the recorded footage from just 2 minutes ago. He watched the man crawl directly behind the cash register. He watched the man slip into the small, dark storage closet located exactly 3 feet behind the stool David was currently sitting on. The video feed caught up to the live moment. The storage closet door on the screen was slightly ajar. David slowly, agonizingly, stopped breathing. The hum of the refrigerators seemed to fade away. He didn't need to look at the monitor anymore, because in the dead silence of the gas station, he could hear a soft, raspy breath coming from the dark closet right behind his back. And then he heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy steel blade being slowly pulled from a leather sheath. David didn't turn around. He didn't scream. He threw himself forward over the counter, crashing onto the linoleum floor on the other side. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the glass front doors faster than he had ever run in his life. He burst out into the freezing desert night, not looking back. He ran down the middle of the empty highway for 2 miles until a passing trucker finally saw him and pulled over. When the state police arrived at the gas station an hour later, the doors were wide open. The store was completely empty. The cash register had not been touched. Nothing was stolen. But when the police reviewed the rest of the security footage, they found something that made even the seasoned detectives sick to their stomachs. After David had thrown himself over the counter and run away, the man in the trench coat had slowly stepped out of the closet. He walked over to the spot where David had just been sitting. He stood there for a long time, staring at the empty stool. And then the man looked directly up into the security camera. He reached into his coat, pulled out a large, serrated hunting knife, and smiled, a wide, terrifying smile at the lens. The police never found the man. He disappeared into the vast, empty desert, just another ghost on the lonely stretch of Route 66. If you ever find yourself driving alone at night and you stop at a brightly lit gas station in the middle of nowhere, pay close attention to the people in the aisles, because sometimes the most dangerous place to be is not in the dark. It is standing perfectly still under the brightest light, pretending that you are safe. When we return in Chapter 3, we will explore a completely different kind of isolation. We will journey into the deep web, where the monsters do not need to walk through your front door. They just need you to click the wrong link. Welcome back. In our previous chapters, we faced the monsters that hunt in the physical world, the creatures in the woods, and the stalkers in the neon light. But in the 21st century, isolation has evolved. You no longer need to be in an empty desert or a high tower to be completely alone and vulnerable. You can be sitting in a crowded apartment building, surrounded by thousands of people, and still be totally isolated from help. This is Chapter 3, The Digital Doppelganger. We all leave a digital footprint. Every time we post a video, leave a voicemail, or stream online. We are leaving pieces of our identity in the cloud. We assume those pieces are safe, but there is a dark side to the internet where those pieces are collected, analyzed, and weaponized. Emma was a 26-year-old freelance graphic designer living in a high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago. She worked mostly at night, enjoying the quiet hours when the city finally slowed down. Like most young professionals, she had a strong social media presence. She posted vlogs, stories, and voice notes. She never thought twice about it. It was a rainy Thursday night. Emma was sitting at her dual-monitor desk, wearing noise-canceling headphones, deeply focused on a project. The only light in her dark apartment came from the glowing screens. At exactly 1:45 in the morning, her cell phone vibrated violently on the desk. She took off her headphones. The caller ID showed it was her mother, who lived 3 states away. Emma frowned. Her mother never called us late unless it was an absolute emergency. She picked up the phone. "Hello, Mom. Is everything okay?" Before Emma could even finish her sentence, her mother's voice burst through the speaker, frantic and hyperventilating. "Emma, oh my God. Emma, are you alive? Are you okay? I am at the bank right now. The ATM only let me pull out $2,000. I am trying to get the rest." Emma felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit her chest. "Mom, slow down. What are you talking about? I am at home. I am sitting at my desk. I am perfectly fine." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. And then her mother started to sob hysterically. "No, that is impossible," her mother cried. "I just hung up with you. You called me from your number. You were screaming, Emma. You were begging for your life. A man got on the phone and said if I didn't wire $10,000 immediately, he was going to kill you. I heard your voice, Emma. I heard you crying." Emma's blood ran cold. She pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at it. She hadn't made a call in hours. "Mom, listen to me," Emma said, her voice shaking. "I am safe. I am in my apartment. My doors are locked. Someone used artificial intelligence to clone my voice. They spoofed my caller ID. It is a scam." It took 10 minutes to calm her mother down, enough to make her go back home and lock her doors. When Emma finally hung up the phone, the silence of her apartment felt entirely different. It felt heavy. It felt malicious. Someone out there had studied her. Someone had scraped hours of her voice from her social media videos, fed it into an AI software, and created a perfect, screaming digital clone of her to extort her terrified mother in the middle of the night. Emma felt incredibly violated, but she thought the nightmare was over. She thought it was just a random cyber attack from halfway across the world. She put her phone down and turned back to her computer screens, intending to shut everything down and go to sleep. But as her hands hovered over the keyboard, her main monitor suddenly flickered. The design software she was working on minimized by itself. A black command prompt window briefly flashed on the screen, and then an internet browser opened automatically. It didn't open to Google. It opened to a completely unindexed, deep web link. The background of the web page was solid black. In the center of the screen was a live video player. At first, the video player was just static, and then the little green indicator light on Emma's own webcam slowly blinked to life. The live video stream loaded. Emma stopped breathing. She was staring at a live, high-definition feed of herself, sitting in the dark glow of her monitors, looking absolutely terrified. There was a viewer count in the top right corner of the screen. It didn't say one viewer. It said over 500 active viewers, and right beneath the live video of Emma's face, a chat box was scrolling rapidly. Dozens of anonymous users were commenting on her appearance. They were commenting on the layout of her apartment. They were making bets on what she would do next. The hacker hadn't just stolen her voice. They had completely compromised her network. They had watched her work for hours. They had watched her panic on the phone with her mother. And they were broadcasting her terror live to a hidden corner of the internet for the sick entertainment of hundreds of strangers. Then, a single message was highlighted in bright red at the top of the chat box. The username simply read, "Admin." The message said, "We have your voice. We have your face. Now, look behind you." Emma's heart stopped. She didn't turn around. She slowly reached forward and violently ripped the webcam cord out of the USB port. She reached under her desk and pulled the main power cable to her entire computer system. The room plunged into total darkness. She grabbed her phone, ran out of her apartment, and locked herself in the brightly lit stairwell of her building until the police arrived. They never found the hacker. The deep web link vanished without a trace, and the IP addresses bounced across dozens of different countries. Emma sold her computer. Emma was a 26-year-old freelance graphic designer living in a high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago. She worked mostly at night, enjoying the quiet hours when the city finally slowed down. Like most young professionals, she had a strong social media presence. She posted vlogs, stories, and voice notes. She never thought twice about it. It was a rainy Thursday night. Emma was sitting at her dual-monitor desk, wearing noise-canceling headphones, deeply focused on a project. The only light in her dark apartment came from the glowing screens. At exactly 1:45 in the morning, her cell phone vibrated violently on the desk. She took off her headphones. The caller ID showed it was her mother, who lived 3 states away. Emma frowned. Her mother never called this late, unless it was an absolute emergency. She picked up the phone. "Hello, Mom. Is everything okay?" Before Emma could even finish her sentence, her mother's voice burst through the speaker, frantic and hyperventilating. Emma, oh my God. Emma, are you alive? Are you okay? I am at the bank right now. The ATM only let me pull out $2,000. I am trying to get the rest. Emma felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit her chest. Mom, slow down. What are you talking about? I am at home. I am sitting at my desk. I am perfectly fine. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. And then her mother started to sob hysterically. No, that is impossible, her mother cried. I just hung up with you. You called me from your number. You were screaming, Emma. You were begging for your life. A man got on the phone and said, if I didn't wire $10,000 immediately, he was going to kill you. I heard your voice, Emma. I heard you crying. Emma's blood ran cold. She pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at it. She hadn't made a call in hours. Mom, listen to me, Emma said, her voice shaking. I am safe. I am in my apartment. My doors are locked. Someone used artificial intelligence to clone my voice. They spoofed my caller ID. It is a scam. It took 10 minutes to calm her mother down enough to make her go back home and lock her doors. When Emma finally hung up the phone, the silence of her apartment felt entirely different. It felt heavy. It felt malicious. Someone out there had studied her. Someone had scraped hours of her voice from her social media videos, fed it into an AI software, and created a perfect, screaming digital clone of her to extort her terrified mother in the middle of the night. Emma felt incredibly violated, but she thought the nightmare was over. She thought it was just a random cyber attack from halfway across the world. She put her phone down and turned back to her computer screens, intending to shut everything down and go to sleep. But as her hands hovered over the keyboard, her main monitor suddenly flickered. The design software she was working on minimized by itself. A black command prompt window briefly flashed on the screen, and then an internet browser opened automatically. It didn't open to Google. It opened to a completely unindexed deep web link. The background of the web page was solid black. In the center of the screen was a live video player. At first, the video player was just static, and then the little green indicator light on Emma's own webcam slowly blinked to life. The live video stream loaded. Emma stopped breathing. She was staring at a live, high-definition feed of herself, sitting in a dark glow of her monitors, looking absolutely terrified. There was a viewer count in the top right corner of the screen. It didn't say one viewer. It said over 500 active viewers. And right beneath the live video of Emma's face, a chat box was scrolling rapidly. Dozens of anonymous users were commenting on her appearance. They were commenting on the layout of her apartment. They were making bets on what she would do next. The hacker hadn't just stolen her voice. They had completely compromised her network. They had watched her work for hours. They had watched her panic on the phone with her mother, and they were broadcasting her terror live to a hidden corner of the internet for the sick entertainment of hundreds of strangers. Then, a single message was highlighted in bright red at the top of the chat box. The username simply read, "Admin." The message said, "We have your voice. We have your face. Now, look behind you." Emma's heart stopped. She didn't turn around. She slowly reached forward and violently ripped the webcam cord out of the USB port. She reached under her desk and pulled the main power cable to her entire computer system. The room plunged into total darkness. She grabbed her phone, ran out of her apartment, and locked herself in the brightly lit stairwell of her building until the police arrived. They never found the hacker. The deep web link vanished without a trace, and the IP addresses bounced across dozens of different countries. Emma sold her computer. She deleted every single social media account she ever had. She wiped her digital footprint completely clean. But the psychological damage was permanent. Every time her phone rings, she wonders who is really on the other end. And every time she walks past a camera lens, she feels the invisible eyes of 500 strangers staring right back at her. We live our lives online, thinking there is a screen protecting us from the monsters. But the screen is not a shield. It is a window. When you post a video tonight, when you leave a voice note, or when you sit in front of your laptop, look closely at the tiny camera lens. Is the light on? We have explored the physical stalkers and the digital thieves. But what happens when the isolation isn't caused by a late-night shift or an empty apartment? What happens when you are trapped in a nightmare and the only person to blame is yourself? Stay tuned for a fourth and final chapter. The GPS Death Trap. Welcome to our fourth and final chapter. Over the past 15 minutes, we have explored the terrifying reality of isolation. We have seen how the deep woods can hide monsters, how a brightly lit gas station can become a trap, and how the digital world can steal your very identity. In all of those stories, the victims were stationary. They were in a tower, a store, or an apartment. But our final story is different, because in this story, the victim was moving. He was in his car, protected by tons of metal and glass, trying to get home. He trusted the glowing screen on his dashboard to guide him safely through the dark. But he forgot one very important rule of the modern age. Technology does not care if you survive the night. This is Chapter 4, the GPS Death Trap. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Marcus was 28 years old, driving back to his apartment in Seattle after visiting family in Idaho. It was a brutal, exhausting 8-hour drive. By the time he crossed the state line, it was pushing to in the morning. A massive, freezing rainstorm had rolled in, turning the interstate into a dangerous sheet of black water. Marcus was gripping the steering wheel, his eyes burning with fatigue. relying entirely on his phone's GPS navigation app mounted on his dashboard. Suddenly, traffic came to a dead stop. Red taillights stretched for miles into the dark, rainy horizon. There was a major accident ahead, and the highway was completely shut down. Marcus let out a frustrated sigh. He looked at his GPS screen. A pop-up notification appeared. It said, "Faster route available. Save 2 hours and 45 minutes." Except, Marcus didn't even hesitate. He tapped the green accept button. He just wanted to get home and sleep. The GPS robotic voice chimed through his car speakers. "Recalculating route. Take the next exit in 1 mile." Marcus slowly merged into the right lane and took the dark, unlit exit ramp. The GPS guided him away from the highway, down a series of small, paved county roads. Within 20 minutes, the glowing lights of the highway were completely gone. He was driving through dense, towering pine trees. The rain was slamming against his windshield. The robotic voice spoke again. "Turn right onto unnamed road." Marcus slowed down. His headlights swept across the turn. It wasn't a paved road. It was a narrow, muddy, dirt path cutting straight into the thick forest. It barely looked wide enough for his sedan. He hesitated. He looked at his phone. He had absolutely zero cell service. The GPS map was preloaded, showing a long, winding line through a gray void. He convinced himself that the algorithm knew best. It was probably just an old logging road that connected to the main highway on the other side of the mountain. He took a deep breath, gripped the wheel, and turned right into the dark forest. The dirt road was incredibly rough. His car bounced over deep potholes and thick tree roots. The trees on either side were so close that their wet branches scraped against his windows like long, wooden fingernails. He drove for another 30 minutes at an agonizingly slow speed. The road just kept going, deeper and deeper into the absolute middle of nowhere. And then the GPS did something it had never done before. The digital map on the screen suddenly glitched. The blue line indicating his route began to zigzag wildly across the screen. The robotic voice crackled through the speakers, sounding distorted by static. "Turn left in 100 feet." Marcus hit the brakes. He peered through the rain-swept windshield. There was no left turn. There was only a solid wall of massive, ancient trees. He said out loud, "There is no road, you stupid machine." He kept driving straight, hoping the GPS would just reroute. But the robotic voice spoke again. It didn't sound like a standard automated voice anymore. The pitch was slightly lower. It sounded almost angry. "I said, turn left." Marcus felt a sharp chill run down his spine. The GPS had never spoken to him like that. It didn't use phrases like, "I said." He pulled the car to a complete stop in the middle of the muddy path. He put the car in park and stared at the glowing screen. The map was completely black now. Just a dark screen with its blue location sitting in the center. The rain hammered against the roof of his car. The voice crackled through the speakers for a third time. You have arrived at your destination. Please turn off your headlights. Marcus stopped breathing. His hands began to shake violently. He was in the middle of a dark, flooded forest, miles away from civilization, with zero cell service. Why would the GPS tell him to turn off his headlights? He didn't touch the light switch. Instead, he slowly reached over and locked all 4 car doors. Click. The speaker crackled immediately. Unlocking doors is recommended for your safety. Please turn off your engine. Pure, unadulterated panic exploded in Marcus's chest. The machine was actively trying to trap him in the dark. He looked up into his rearview mirror. The red glow of his taillights illuminated the muddy road behind him. And standing in the pouring rain, about 50 feet behind his car, were 3 tall figures. They were completely motionless. They were wearing dark, heavy raincoats, and they were just standing there, blocking the road, staring directly at the back of his car. They were waiting for the lights to go out. Marcus didn't think. He slammed his foot on the brake, threw the transmission into reverse, and floored the gas pedal. The tires spun in the thick mud, screaming against the dirt, before finally catching traction. The car shot backward into the dark. He didn't look in the rearview mirror again. He drove in reverse, blindly navigating the twisting dirt road for what felt like hours, scraping the sides of his car against the trees, until he finally backed out onto the paved county road. He spun the car around and drove at 90 miles an hour until he saw the bright, beautiful neon lights of a gas station near the highway. Marcus never found out who or what those figures were in the woods. When he checked his phone the next morning, the GPS history for that night was completely wiped clean. It showed that he had never left the highway. To this day, he refuses to use a digital map. He keeps a paper atlas in his glove box because Marcus learned the ultimate lesson of the modern world. Just because a machine tells you exactly where to go doesn't mean it wants you to get there alive. Over the past hour, we have taken a dark journey into the true meaning of isolation. We have stood in the glass tower above the trees. We have waited in the empty gas station. We have watched our own lives broadcast on the deep web. And we have followed the wrong road into the dark. These stories are a reminder that the world is a massive, lonely place. And when you strip away the safety of the crowds, the bright light of the city, and the comfort of your home, you are left with a very chilling reality. We are never truly alone in the dark. There is always something waiting in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the light. Thank you for surviving this 1-hour journey into the terrifying reality of isolation. If you made it to the very end of this documentary, leave a comment down below and tell me which of these 4 true stories terrified you the most. If you want to hear more deep dives into the dark, the unsolved, and the unknown, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell and give this video a like. Stay safe, never ignore your instincts, and I will see you in the next nightmare.